Welcome to the Battle Ready podcast, where we know that every single day is a battle. This show is about equipping you mentally, physically, and spiritually to win the daily battles. I want you to become totally free, whole, and powerful. It's time to step into your battles equipped and ready to win. I'm your host, Dr. Kaylee Judge. Let's get battle ready. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Battle Ready podcast. I am super excited. If you are a normal listener, you have known that we sort of took a mini break and we took a pause after number 7. And we are still in the Enneagram series. We've got 2 more episodes to break through and let you guys know exactly what's going on. And then we'll start a fresh new series and start going from there. But I'm excited to be back with my friend Angie, and she's going to talk to us about my favorite Enneagram number 8. This is my number. I'm an 8 on the Enneagram wheel. And it's funny because this is the one that gets the bad rap. Like, when you get an 8, it's like, oh, you're an 8. I'm going to stay far, far away from you. So I'm hoping that we can expose some of the weaknesses and how to become stronger in those weaknesses. And I can't wait to learn what Angie has to say in this, as well as maybe help set some of you guys free and give you the authority to stand in your 8-ness and know that you are just as good as all the other numbers, and God loves you just as much. So, Angie, welcome back. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I think I want to say something before I forget. You said we're going to talk about my favorite number, the 8, and I love that because initially when people realize what their number is, that is not typically their first response, because it's our human nature, right, to be exposed for what we are and naturally want to be something different, because we see what other people are and we're like, well, I wish I was that, or I wish I was that. And so to be able to, like what you said, stand in who you are with great pride and confidence is really, really important in this whole process, no matter what number you are. So I really, because when I first realized I was a 4, I wanted to be any number but 4, because I was so exposed to the weaknesses or the pitfalls of a 4 and I saw them. And so I kind of bucked it and didn't want to be a 4. But when we can really embrace all the amazing qualities of our number, we really can say, this truly is my favorite number on the Enneagram. So, because it's who we are, it's how we were wired.
Yeah, I think it's fun to learn, because I remember, like, when I first found out, like, I took the test and it kind of didn't mean anything to me and nobody really explained anything, and then I was with a group of friends and I pulled my results up and their response was, oh, you're like the worst combination. And I was like, well, thanks for making me feel good. Like, I didn't understand what that meant, and since I've gone through and learned some of the things going on here, I really think that it's you've got to take it for what it is. There's good and bad in all of them, and each person brings out a personality that is strong for what's needed. Yes, there's some weaknesses that seep out and things like that, but I really just want to be able to help you understand what that means. So we're going to go through that, and I'm excited to kind of give some personal insights as we go along. So I'm going to let you take the wheel and kind of just navigate through that, and I'll pop in every once in a while.
Awesome. So just to piggyback off what you just said, it really is, the Enneagram really is a picture of the body of Christ, right? So scripture says that if we were all fingers or all hands or all, heads, we would not be productive in society. So really and truly, it is a picture of the body of Christ as to how we all have our unique giftedness. And so we really need to navigate towards our giftedness in finding our path. right? And so for the 8, the protective challenger or the challenger, they are challenging. And it is a great description of who they are. My youngest, hands down, I don't typically encourage typing your kids at a very early age, but for my kids, they so stand out in their strengths of what their numbers are. I know what their numbers are. My youngest is almost 10, and hands down, I know he's an 8. And the interesting thing about an 8, and I see this in him all the time, is they have a reputation of always wanting to be in control or wanting to control everything around them. And that really is a harsh misconception of the 8. They really don't have to be in control. And actually, he doesn't love being in control of all of the things going on around him. He'll step back quite often. It's that he doesn't like to feel like he's being controlled. And there is a stark difference in those two things. And so it really stinks that they really do get a bad rap of trying to control everything and everyone, when that really isn't the core of their personality. They just don't like to be controlled. And so it's interesting parenting an 8 and then parenting an 8 and then as a child, and then looking at the broad spectrum of 8s as adults and things like that, as to how we do life with an 8. They're actually the most energetic on the Enneagram. They have more energy. Some might say that they would think that a 7 probably would be, just because they're always looking for that adventure. But 8s are very, very, they're very determined. They're very active. They're very, they're just very straightforward in their life, in all areas of their life. They're very compassionate. They inspire. They're very resilient. And so they're very energetic and direct. They're very to the point. And that is where they get a really, really bad rap, is because of their communication style. Because at their best, they're all those amazing things, right? They're self-confident. They're very protected. So if you have an 8 in your corner, you will always have that 8 in your corner, and they will have your back. Like, they will have your back until you betray them. So we'll talk deeper about that in their work, in their core fear. But betraying an 8 really is deciding that you're okay not having them in your life, because it's hard to get them back in your circle if they feel betrayed.
I think it's yes, and yes to all of that. I think it's funny, the control thing. Like you said, like your son doesn't mind not being in control, but we don't like being controlled. And it's not this isn't a conversation of whether I'm okay with authority figures or not okay with authority figures. Because I do respect authority. I do respect leaders. But I do also, I think it's a matter of, I want to play a role in being able to determine the outcome. And so if I'm not a part of that role, then it feels like I'm just being pawned around. And I think that's important. And even it's funny because I had a friend witness a conversation with me and another 8, and we left that conversation and she was explaining it to another one of our friends, and she was like, oh, they had this heated argument, and it was such a hard discussion, and they're problematic, like just explaining this. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we were just having a conversation. We were just talking. Because what it was is that we are both very like direct and to the point. And it's, for me, a lot of things are like, it's black or it's white. It's yellow or it's red. You know, there's no like in between of that. And so when I communicate, sometimes it comes out as like super direct. Even some of my team, we've got some new team members on our team in our office, and you know, one of their I don't know if it's a complaint or a point that they've made was that I'm direct or I'm short. And I'm like, yeah, because I don't have to go through this whole big long explanation to tell you to go to go put somebody in a different room. It's like, hey, move that person to that room and move that person to that room. And so it's one of my favorite parts about me is being direct, but it also is one of the hardest for other people to receive.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we understand, going back to, if you haven't listened to past the intro that we did, would highly recommend listening to the intro. But to go back to that, it's understanding that the lens by which we see life through is very different based on our number. And so a conflict with 2 8s, or not even a conflict, a conversation with, say, an 8 and a 3, you and your brother, can look very conflictual to a 2 or a 9, the helper and the peacemaker, when really y'all's perception is we're just having a conversation trying to hash out, how we're going to do business, or how we're going to do marketing, or how we're going to do this or whatever. And so it can be perceived very differently based on the color of lens that you're kind of seeing that situation through. The situation didn't change. It was what it was. It was what it was. But the lens by which you're interpreting that through is very, very different based on your Enneagram type. And so 8s don't give fluff. And so we understand that very clearly because they can be very controlling at times. They can be very insensitive at times. When they are in a crunch time and they need to communicate something to you, it can come across very indignant and insensitive based on the surrounding circumstances. Well, I wasn't upset with you. I wasn't mad at you. I just needed something done, and I was in crunch time and I had to get to another patient. So it's very facts based for an 8. Like this is very logical based. They can be skeptical. What we talked about in that fear of being betrayed. They don't like the feeling of betrayal. It gives them a sense of being depowered or betrayed, and they don't like their trust to be betrayed. And so when that happens, they put their wall up, because what we know about an 8 is vulnerability is very hard for them. We'll get deeper into that. But their focus of attention is going to be taking charge, gaining power, and overcoming injustice. And it's interesting because when I first was introduced to the Enneagram, I thought, 8s are passionate about any injustice that's out there. And that's not necessarily so. And so someone might see a lot of what's going on in our culture today and expect any 8 on the Enneagram to be passionate about that, when that may not be the core of the injustices that they're passionate about. Now, they can find empathy there, but they might not be passionate about every injustice that goes on. But when they will dig their heels in big time to fight that injustice, or to expose whatever needs to be exposed in that realm. So
yeah, and I think that's important to bring up, because that is true. Like, there's a lot of things that I'm empathetic about, but I don't get I don't get riled up about really most things. Like, there's certain topics where I'll come up and be like, man, I get heated when we start talking about that kind of stuff. So that's just interesting to kind of point out when it comes to, just looking at what's going on around the world right now. It's like, I'm empathetic about all the topics, but there's a handful of them where I'm like, I'm going to go do something about this.
Mm-hmm. And you'll dig in. Like, I know we've had conversations about the extensive research that you've done in different areas. That's because you're passionate in those areas, and you're indignant that there is something going on that maybe not everyone is exposed to or everyone realizes. And you're like, how can I be a part of the solution? And that is where 8s really come into play societally. They really are those people that are going to look for that solution, and do everything in their power to find it. And so within each number, though, we understand that there's a core fear and a core desire that can really be the pinpoint of what our number is. I tell people all the time that if you're struggling to know what your numbers are, because there are similar numbers on the Enneagram, 3 and 8, very strong personalities, very driven personalities. 2 and 9, very peacemaking personalities. So when we think about that, we can get caught up in, well, which one am I? I kind of look like both. Then what I like to look at is core motivation. And truly, we can look at the human nature and understand that core fear and core desire drive us in so many areas. Our fears and our desires drive us as humans. We're typically running from our core fear and running towards our core desire. And it's almost, it has a word picture of like a tug of war. We're going back and forth, core fear, core desire, and we're kind of stuck in the middle of these two things throughout life, depending on the season we're in. And so if you don't resonate with that core fear and core desire of that number, I would really challenge that is your number. And so this is where I take people initially when they're struggling back and forth with, well, am I an 8? Am I a 3? Am I one, a different number? And so the core fear of an 8, the challenger, is going to be weakness. They don't want to be weak and they don't want to appear weak. Powerless, underestimated. They want to feel like people can count on them. Disempowered, humiliated. Deceit is humiliating to them. So that's where we run into that. If they feel like they've been deceived or you've betrayed them, that's humiliating to them. And so it's very hard to earn that place in their life back. Vulnerability. Being vulnerable is a core fear for them. Being controlled or manipulated. Then the core desire is to protect themselves. So that's where vulnerability is hard for them, because it feels like 8s constantly have this, whether it's a high barrier or a low barrier, or a short barrier, they seem to always have some type of barrier around them. That they use to protect themselves.
Yeah, it's funny. Like you talked about people in protecting themselves. So one of my biggest things is like if I'm betrayed, or if a friend in a group, like I have a very I believe 8s have very close friends, small number of close friends, and if you're in, you're in, and I will jump in front of a flying truck to save your life. It doesn't matter what's happening or what's going on. But it really is so fascinating that like the second that there's betrayal or there's something that happens, it's like, you're out. Sorry. I'll still love you. I'll still pray for you. I know God loves you. But we're not going to be close probably ever again. And that's like my first instinct, that when things happen, is I move into that space of, wow, you screwed that up. Good luck with your life. Have fun. But I'm not going to be the one that lays down my life for you, right. Which is not a Jesus thing. So there's another motive where I've had to learn through that it's not. Even I was reading this morning about, we love because he first loved us. And we have to stand in that gap of, okay, I could use this 8 thing as an excuse to hate people that have come against me, or I can walk in the love of Jesus and say, how would he handle this? Right. And the way that I have been handling it is not okay. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to learn how to navigate through all this stuff, to not only protect myself, but protect my family and be vulnerable, right? I could use this excuse of, oh, I'm an 8, so I'm not good at being vulnerable, therefore I don't have to be vulnerable. Or you say, I'm an 8, but I'm first a child of God, and I'm first going to walk in this truth. And if God loves me and Jesus died for me, then I get to walk in that truth first. And so vulnerability is of Christ. And so that's where we're going to talk about when we move on a little bit further, is building our strengths and building up our weaknesses, and go into those healthy versus unhealthy versions of us.
Absolutely. And something that I've recently been doing, and we didn't do this with the other numbers, but I think it is beneficial, is something that I've been studying and doing is, what is EQ, emotional intelligence? Because I'm super passionate about emotional. As a counselor, you have to understand that so many things, a cognitive distortion that we as humans often struggle with is this idea of, if I feel it, it must be true. So we have to find a balance, right, of going, I feel betrayed, therefore it should be okay for me to, exclude them from my life from here on after, right? And so there's this balance of, is it okay to protect ourselves? Well, of course, because Jesus said, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. All right. Or scripture says, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. So there's this happy balance that is really hard to find, actually, of, yes, guarding your heart, but also understanding that as much as love and grace that is extended to us through the love of Christ, we're also expected to extend it to others. And so that is a really hard balance to find, especially depending on the number that you are. 6s and 8s are probably the most loyal on the Enneagram. They're also the ones that keep people at an arm's length the most on the Enneagram. And so they really have to keep tabs on their relationships and their expectations of relationships, depending on where these people fall in their circle of friends. But the interesting thing is, within EQ, or emotional intelligence, there's challenges and strengths for each number. And for the challenger, self-confidence and resiliency, they are awesome at bouncing back. So it looks like deceit doesn't impact them as much as it does, because they can bounce back really fast, but it's what they do with that person that is the big factor. It's not that they don't bounce back, but it's what they do with that person. It's like, okay, you're now out, right? Trustworthiness, very strong, and achievement drive. But their challenges tend to be empathy, especially when they've been betrayed, self-control, because we'll see this in a little bit, that they're very straightforward and don't have a lot of fluff around what they want to say, communication, and then cooperation, because they tend to see things the way they think it should be done. And it's very hard to open their mindset up to other people's opinions.
Yes.
All of those
with all of that and move along.
Yeah. So the one thing that we love to talk about, right, is how to get along with each of the numbers. And one of the things that 8s really do fall prey to, I would dare to say, 8s and 3s probably struggle. 8s, 3s, and 1s probably struggle seeing their blind spots more than any number on the Enneagram. 9s will be willing to see their blind spot, because if it keeps peace, then fine, I'll see it, I'll look at it, but 1s, 3s, and 8s probably struggle the most with seeing their blind spots. And so it's really important for us to know, okay, how do we do life with an 8? But then for an 8 to kind of really look at how to get along with each of the other numbers, understanding that maybe I need to step outside of my box here because I'm talking to a 4, or I'm working with a 6, or something along those lines, and going, okay, how can I approach him or her differently than what my core personality really just wants to get this conversation over with.
Yeah, because the easiest thing to do is to say, okay, everybody's supposed to be like me, and this is for every number, right?
Sure.
Everybody's supposed to be the same, but just listening through the other not the other 8 types, it's like, oh, not everybody's the same. People don't react the same. People don't receive the same. People don't deliver the same, and so we have to we really as a human, and I think more people need to listen to this type of a podcast to understand like how to have a human interaction, because that's really being stripped away from us right now, and it's turning into, let's just have a temper tantrum rather than have a conversation because you and I don't agree with each other. Where for me, and that's where Jesus comes into play, is where he has softened my heart in those moments of, okay, they're not an 8. They're definitely not receiving this the way that I'm intending it for it to come out. And so I have to reverse engineer my conversation to how they're going to receive it, and what that's called being selfless, right? And so we got to think less of ourselves and more of the person that we're having a conversation with, and say, okay, how are they going to receive this? And how can I put this in a way that's going to be receivable?
Right. And the other piece to emotional intelligence, people understand that emotional intelligence is being in tune with your own emotions. But the other half, and I literally mean half, I don't mean 25%. I mean, the other half of emotional intelligence, or EQ, is being in tune with the emotions of others. So there's an equal portion there of understanding that, yes, I can be in tune to my own emotions, but if I'm oblivious to those around me and how they respond, then my EQ, isn't any better than somebody that is completely unself-aware. So if you're self-aware but not others aware, then we still have a big gap and a big problem. And so
this takes a lot of practice.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like, it's not like,
but anything worth doing does. And that's what I tell people all the time. I specifically have a good friend. I've been friends with her for 20 years and nothing has changed in her life. For 20 years, I've begged her to get counseling. And I would tell her, I would say, listen, why don't you just want to do the hard stuff for a year and then live the rest of your life in freedom? But instead, she's chosen to live the hard stuff for 20 years, do nothing about any change. And so therefore, she's been stuck for 20 years, literally, when it really would have only taken a year, maybe 2 years to deal with the hard stuff. And then she would have lived the rest of her life in freedom and experiencing the true freedom that Christ has for her. But so often we make choices based on the moment, or we don't want to do the hard things in the moment. And I'm like, okay, but does that change your circumstances? And your circumstances are hard. So it's which one do you want to deal with? Do you want to do the hard work and the intentional work, or do you just want to live stuck for the rest of your life? Because that's really where we find ourselves, depending on our situation, circumstance, we find ourselves stuck.
Yeah. And that's where we have to take those moments of like, okay, I'm committed to doing this, but then also realizing, hey, you're going to walk away from a lot of conversations and be like, whoa, I didn't handle that very well, and so recognizing that, and then, be the bigger person of being able to go up to them and be like, hey, I'm sorry how I did that.
Yeah.
How can I fix it next time? Also not a very easy thing to do. Right. And so we're not saying like, okay, decide that you're going to do it, and it's the rest of your conversations are going to be totally perfect from here on out. Probably the opposite, because you're going to screw it up even more, because now you're intentionally thinking about other people. But be the bigger person that walks in and says, hey, I didn't handle that very well, so I need to ask for forgiveness. And how can we make this conversation better?
And a place of vulnerability for 8s that you bring up a really great point. A place of vulnerability for an 8, oftentimes pride is a struggle for 8s. So when they feel betrayed, and it can be a minor betrayal or a major betrayal, but when they feel betrayed, they often think in their minds, well, I would never do that. And they might not. That specific thing that person did or didn't do, they might not ever do that. But the humility comes in understanding, yeah, I might not do that, but I do other things that need forgiveness for, that need grace, that need mercy. And so it's that balance of understanding that may be their weakness, I have my own. And that's where we can let our guard down a little bit and say, okay, I get it. You might not be in my inner circle. That's okay, but I can extend forgiveness and grace and move forward.
Yeah, totally. I remember even just recently was having a conversation with somebody about somebody else. And I was like, oh, this person is this, and this. And I got home and God was just like, well, that wasn't very good. So I had to go back to talk to the person that I was talking about the other person with. And I was like, hey, not a good thing, right? What I just did is not a good thing. And I had to be super humble about this and hey, can I have some forgiveness and just wipe off anything that I just said, because that's not the place that I want to be walking in. And so that takes a lot of vulnerability to confront your weaknesses with another person. And so when you start confronting those moments, growth happens, exponential, that you can't even begin to imagine. And then God starts to open up different doors for you to learn through these processes.
Absolutely. And that's why the path to growth for 8s is vulnerability or humility, is letting down your guard enough to go to that person or whatever, or share how you felt about it versus just cutting them off. Because that is the natural tendency, right? And so whether that relationship is ever mended to 100%, at least I've been vulnerable enough to share how I feel, to share how that impacted me, and I can move on in freedom, understanding that I handled it in a vulnerable way of health, in a healthy space. So how do you get along with an 8? So some tips for that is 8s like to see that you're able to stand up for yourself. Now, what 8s also need to realize is that that doesn't come easy for everybody. 8s can firmly stand up for themselves and others, but that doesn't come easy for everybody. So understanding that 8s need to see that in their people is really important. It may take practice. Doesn't mean that you have to be opposite of who you are, but it's always good to understand how to stand up for yourself and not be a doormat like 2s often find themselves. Be confident, strong, and direct. They do not need fluff. So to go into a meeting or a conversation with them, you really can be very direct with them, and they're fine with it. They rarely take offense to that. Notice that I am tender and vulnerable. I have a tender and vulnerable side behind my strong exterior. So what they show people is actually very little, a fraction of who they actually are. And that's the cool thing about an 8. So what they reveal to people in their strong exterior is really just a minimal fraction of the depth of an 8. They really are deep. They have a lot of depth to them. And so acknowledge the contribution that they make. That is really important to them. And then they often speak in direct and assertive ways. So try not to take offense to it. So when you step back away from a conversation with an 8, just mentally remind yourself that's just who they are. it really has nothing to do with me. It's not an offense towards me. One thing that I've really gotten into with my corporate trainings is using the 4 agreements in the Enneagram. And one of the 4 agreements in this little book is don't take anything personally. And we really talk a ton about that with the Enneagram, is if you can step back from a conversation with an 8 and really remind yourself that that's just who they are. They're very direct. They're very to the point. They don't give a lot of fluff. It really does help to let your guard down and not take offense. Because it's not really, it really has nothing to do with that person. It's really just who they are.
Yeah, I have to tell my team, it's like, I don't need the story of what's everything happened. Like, just give me the facts and let's go. Right. Where some of my team members, they need me to like slow down and tell me everything that's going on in order for them to move on. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah. And what might help you in your practice, I don't know how your practice is set up, is to in the hiring process is to have someone that does have that giftedness of listening to all the things, right? Maybe it's office manager that has that giftedness, or whatever. So using the Enneagram in the hiring process in going, what do I holistically need in my company or in my practice, is really, really cool and fascinating.
That's good.
Yeah. So do you want to know where y'all go in stress and growth?
Yeah.
So the interesting part about the 8s is so 8s can cut off emotionally anyway if they feel, like we've said, if they feel betrayed or not very close to someone, or they don't feel like this person's a part of their inner circle. They can cut off and they can put that guard up. In stress, they actually go to the low side, or I don't like to say go to, because it insinuates that their number changes in stress. And that's not what we're talking about. They actually exemplify some of the characteristics of the average to unhealthy 5. So the 5 is the thinker, and 5s can disconnect very easily from their emotions if they need to. Excuse me. So in stress, and we've said this multiple times, this can be a stressful situation, or it can be a stressful season of life that you find yourself in. Either one, they go to this place of withdrawing, being fearful, and probably a little bit overly sensitive. And 5s find themselves in those spaces in the average to unhealthy. In the growth, however, they can move or exemplify the healthy qualities of the 2, which is the helper. And we've alluded to the 2 quite a bit, but they become more open, more caring, more empathetic, more helpful. They're more vulnerable. They put themselves out there more, and more compassionate. So they let their guard down, because 2s really in their unhealth can be very much of a doormat. And so they let their guard down as a healthy 2 would, and they really open themselves up for more extensive compassion and empathy towards others.
Yeah, so you nailed it. It's funny because like in stressful moments or seasons or whatever you want to call it, busyness of life, like I get quiet. Like if I get quiet, I'm like, don't talk to me, don't mess with me, let me do what I need to do. Or even like if I have a deadline to get something done and then I have people trying to have conversation with me behind me and I'm working on my computer, it's like it's like a gnat flying around my head. Like, would you just leave me alone while I finish this project? So that's when I go into that stressful moment of like, I'm trying to finish something. Leave me alone, right? Closed off, walled up, quiet. And then also in that growth moment where you're talking about the two, it's like, I want to help the whole planet in that moment. Like what resources do I have to help other people? And I'll do whatever it takes to do that.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about this whole, state of lines and arrows and growth and stress is understanding that we are not a stagnant people. So as humans, we're not stagnant. So people ask me, without fail, I get this question and going, well, how do I move towards growth and just stay there? I'm like, I wish we had the capability of doing that. But the interesting thing about what this tool can do for us is it can show us how we are moving about life, right? So while I wish I had the magic wand to get people to a growth place to stay there, that's just not realistic. Yeah. But what is realistic is for us to be aware when we start to fall from that growth space, or when we start to exemplify some of those stressful attributes in our number. And so for you, in that moment of stress, will that change much? I mean, maybe, but it's the seasons of stress that you really need to watch out for, because fives can isolate. And so isolation is not good for too many people. It can be good for sevens. Isolation can be good for sevens at times if they're in their growth space, because they get such a high off of adventure and people and all those things that to practice some isolation can be good. But for an 8, when they go to that growth, that stress place, and it's a season of life, we really have to concentrate on willing ourselves to not isolate and not cut off emotionally and relationally, because we can get in that space, and if we're not careful, we can get really comfortable in that space.
Yeah, for sure. Can we talk real quick about the wings, the 7 wing and the 9 wing?
Absolutely. So with our wings, to just do a little bit of an overview as to how I teach and train on the wings, because it's a bit different. I don't typically feel as though everybody falls into an 8 with a 7 wing or an 8 with a 9 wing, right? And a lot of teachers and trainers do. So your wings are the numbers on either side of you. So obviously we're talking about an 8. So the wings would be the 7 and the 9. And so this is what gives, I like to say, layer or flavor to our number. And I really feel like most people utilize both of their wings. Just most people also utilize one more than the other. So how I like to describe this is kind of thinking of your core number as your home space, or your a hard-boiled egg, right? And then your wings are your salt and pepper. Now, some people like more salt than pepper, and vice versa, and things like that. So that 8 with the 7 wing is going to they're going to crave more adventure. They're going to crave more excitement. They're going to be more of an extrovert, and things like that, because that is some characteristics of the 7 that begin to come out in the challenger. Right? The 9, the peacemaker, and it sounds so starkly different, the 8 and the 9, because the 8 really doesn't mind conflict. And if they're in an unhealthy place, they almost thrive off of it. And so the 8 that utilizes the 9 wing more often is going to be more of your 8s that are they're more of peacemakers. They want peace. They want to figure out a way to find peace within conflict. They're going to be more solitude. They're going to have more solitude in their life than the 8 utilizing the 7 wing. And they're not going to be as conflictual as the core 8 would find themselves. They're just going to tap more into that peaceful side of things. But they're not the core of who they are, very justice driven, very direct. Those things. I have a friend that's a 9 with a 8 wing, and the way she describes it is she doesn't mind conflict. It's unresolved conflict that she doesn't like. And so she will go to that 8 wing. She will be very direct. She will give it to you straight. And then she's like, I expect this to be over and done with. So you can kind of imagine how that 8 utilizes that peacemaker qualities of going, okay, let's make peace. Let's get this over with. But it's in a very much of a more direct way than the core 9 peacemaker that kind of shoves things under the carpet in order to pretend like it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's funny because like when there is conflict and we have to like, let's say you and I got in a fight, right? And we had to fix it. It would be one conversation and we would get everything out and it would be fixed. Then for me, there's no carrying it for the next 10 years. We fixed that. Like I have a friend who's a 6 and we'll have conversations and really work on trying to figure out each other. And we'll resolve something and I'll be like, I'm done then. The conversation's over and it's good to go. And then she'll bring it up and now she's like, is it really done? And I'm like, what else do we have to say? Like we've said everything we need to say. We've forgiven each other. Let's move forward. Why do we want to go back on that? And so it's just funny how even with that, it's like direct. It's resolved or it's not resolved, right? And there's ways to do that when it comes to that. So even when you're dealing with other people as an 8, you want to see that person. And I've had to step back and say, okay, I know their personality and I know that the conversation that we just had doesn't mean that it's finished, even though it's finished in my brain. And so I'll have to re-engage with the conversation a day or 2 later and say, hey, just let you know, like we're still okay. Everything's good. We've come through everything. If you don't feel the same way, let's get it out now. Right.
Right. And understanding that there are numbers on the Enneagram, 9s and 5s specifically, they really are processors. Now, the motivation behind the processing is very different for each of those numbers. So the 9 is going to process more so because they want to avoid, because they don't want to have the conversation anyway, because it's conflictual. The 5 truly is, they are processors. They like to process the whole situation in their head because they're very cerebral. And they like to process the whole thing in their head before they have that conversation. So for somebody that's very direct, like an 8, that wants to get it out and get it open, feels like the 5 is just trying to avoid it or sweep it under the carpet, when really, they really are just trying to wrap their brain around the whole thing because they do not process quickly. And so it's understanding how different numbers process conflict. I think that's one of the biggest benefits to this tool is the conflict resolution. Is we really can come to resolution in a healthy way if we take the time to understand each other and where each other is coming from.
So what if I'm an 8 and I'm walking around in a severely unhealthy version of that number? What are your recommendations for someone to begin to move towards health?
Okay, you're a bulldozer in that space, truly. And so
scary.
You are literally plowing through everything and everyone that gets in your way of your agenda. So you are very agenda oriented. So your stance is moving towards whatever will get your agenda done. And so, and that can be in health or unhealth. Like, as far as like your stance is your stance. And so you standing firmly in and moving towards your agenda is not necessarily a bad thing. It becomes a bad thing, like you said, in your unhealth. And you have to be willing to step back and take a breath and ask yourself one of the questions that I truly believe that can help every single number on the Enneagram that I challenge my clients with is this: is what I'm doing benefiting me in a positive way? And if we will do a self-check on that every now and then, every couple days, once a week, whatever, if we will do a self-check on that, and we will ask ourselves, is what I'm doing benefiting me and those around me in a positive way? Then we can first become self-aware that no, what I'm doing is not working. And so we become, first of all, aware that's not working, and that's not benefiting me or the people around me in a positive way. And then it's just going back to what are the things that make me who I am and make me successful in the things that I'm successful in, that make me people want to be around me. And truly, I tell people all the time, opposite action, opposite action. When you find yourself in an unhealthy space, you have to do what you don't feel like doing.
Yep.
I had a client call this morning, and she said, but I just feel like I just want to lay in bed. And I go, well, then you do what you don't feel like doing. And that's that you get up and you have breakfast and you get your day going. And we call that, in the psychology world and dialectical behavioral therapy, we call that opposite action. So whatever you feel like doing in those unhealthy spaces, do the opposite.
Yep. That's for so many things, even when it comes to health. Like, if you feel like you want to lose more weight, you want to have more energy, you want to do all these things, you want to fix your gut. Like, I had a conversation with a patient this week, and she was like, I've got all these gut issues. I'm taking all the supplements. And I said, well, what's your diet like? Like, what are you eating? And she's like, well, I'm eating terribly, but I'm taking the supplements. And I'm like, there you go. Opposite action. Like, eat healthy food and your body's going to respond to that. Do healthy things, and your personality and your life is going to, and the people around you are going to respond to that. If the people around you are angry or are upset or are closed off, do you have any part of that? Are you the cause of those people closing off? And if you are, like, check yourself and move on. It's time to, I'm just in this season of, like, it's just time for us to be having adult conversations and doing adult big kid things of, hey, I did something wrong to you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How can I fix it?
We do not live in a culture that teaches us to put our big girl pants on. We just don't.
Not anymore. No.
Not anymore. No. And so,
But does that mean you can't, right? Does that mean that we, does that mean that we continue to let that be the excuse of, oh, we don't live in this, and I'm not saying this against you at all, because I know that we're on the same page, but does that mean that we don't live in that society or that culture anymore, so I'm just not going to do that? No, that's using an excuse to have some sort of a personality or character defect and be okay with it. Where the person that's putting their big boy or big girl pants on says, oh shoot, I am part of the problem. I am like, this is me speaking right here. I am part of the problem, because I know that I'm a challenger, and I know that I'm a bulldozer, and I know that if I don't correct those things, I'm going to hurt people along my path. And that's not who God designed me to be. Right. And so go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I was doing a corporate training this week, and 99.9% of the time we fall into two categories. We're either a part of the problem or we're a part of the solution. And so even in our stagnancy or complacency, we become part of the problem, because we're telling ourselves that the cultural norm is okay. Mm-hmm. And so you have to ask yourself, I truly believe in daily check-ins with ourselves. And so I have to ask myself in the mornings, am I being a part of the problem or am I being a part of the solution? I'm going to fall into one of those categories most often. Mm-hmm. I'm just not going to, ride the fence or the coattail of somebody else for long periods of time and not fall into one of those, into one of those categories. And so, people tell me all the time, well, I'm not really a leader. Like I don't have leadership qualities. And I'm like, like my pastor always says, leadership is influence and everybody has influence. So you are either influencing someone in a positive way or you're influencing someone in a negative way. You may want to believe that you don't have leadership qualities, but you're an influencer because you're a human. And so you have to decide, are you going to influence someone in a positive way or are you going to influence someone in a negative way? And we can go either way on any given moment.
And somebody else's actions is not your, how do I want to say this? Somebody else's actions isn't an excuse for you to have poor responses, poor conversations, poor reactions. Your life, your influence, your surrounding world is still your responsibility. Right. if you want more positive things in your life, you've got to put more positive things in your life.
Right. And let me talk to parents just for a minute. I teach a college course on family systems and dynamics, and it feels like a very overwhelming class to teach, because I feel like the right answer is that everything starts in the home. And I do believe that it does, but the conflictual, that it's a very conflictual answer, because I feel like we see so much dysfunction in the family, and what do we do with that? But I tell my kids all the time, you never have a good excuse to respond in a negative way. I don't care if someone hauls off and hits you. I don't care if they call you a bad name. I don't care. You never have an excuse to respond in a bad way. You're responsible for that. And so I feel like that is going against the cultural norm of parenting these days, but I will never be okay or give my kids an excuse to respond out of their unhealth and it be okay. And so that's a little bit about what you're talking about here. And eights do struggle with that. They because they're so impulsive. But the growth for an 8 is being able to put some space between what happened and your response.
Yeah. To take a deep breath.
Yeah.
It's okay to pause and not say anything.
Practice the pause.
Right away.
Yeah.
Or for a day or two. Sometimes I have to, like the other day there was something that, like, all the things were going wrong. And it was things that shouldn't have had to go wrong, kind of a moment. And all I wanted to do was just explode. And finally I was like, I'm going to go home because I think that's the best decision for me to do right now. And I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Right. And so I didn't leave mad. I didn't leave angry. I didn't explode and hurt somebody else's feelings. I just knew that if I stayed in that scenario any longer, I would have said and did things that I would have regretted later. And so it's okay to walk away from a thing, a conversation, an issue. If it's like, I can come up with a whole bunch of response. I'm very quick. I'm very savvy, right? And I can come up with responses very quickly, but they're not good most of the time. God is shifting that and changing that around in my life, and it's cool to watch that happen. But right now, most of the time I have to zip my lips and either take what's coming at me or walk away. Hey, I hear you. I see you, but I cannot have this conversation right now.
Right.
And that's
Right.
out of respect for the other person. And so that's where we have to go. And even like I was thinking when you were talking about the parenting and things like that, you know, if you are a parent and you're listening, you are influencing your children. The way you talk to your spouse, like
Absolutely.
I can go to a grocery store and hear a young child make a response or say a thing, and it's like, well, where did they learn that from? They're sponges. They're picking literally everything up from you. And so I can tell you within one interaction at a grocery store what your home life is like just because of how your daughter or your son has said things. Um, and so I just want to encourage you that wherever you're at and whatever your walk is, that you still have the ability to take control of your responses, your reactions, the way that you navigate throughout your life. And if you're struggling with that, hey, Angie's an amazing resource. I've sent people to her. I know that she's got just these resources that are amazing within just one conversation. And if you're not comfortable with that, like she'll help walk you. And this isn't a plug for her, but it's a plug for her because I know where her heart's at. I know what she wants to see is she wants to see Jesus come out through you.
Yeah.
And what that takes bringing myself down, my ego, my response, and I want to have what response would Jesus have right now?
Mm-hmm.
And that is so not easy. And
Right.
if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And if it was easy, this whole entire world would be totally different. But we're all out for me and mine and what am I going to get out of this conversation? And that's just not okay. And so start in your home, start in your work, start in your your group, your friend group. Let those people see the change in you so that you can go out and empower them to change as well.
Yeah. It's a domino effect, and it starts with one domino, truly. Only takes one domino to start the domino effect.
Is there anything that you want to add on to this to close up?
I think that's about it. I love what you said, and this is hard for a lot of personalities, probably all of us, just because we're human. But scripture says that I must become less and he must become more. And so it's a stance of humility that we all have to take each and every day in order to grow. Growth is never going to happen in the prideful spaces of our life. And so it's just being willing. It's being willing. I had a tank top made because when Abraham went to the mountain to sacrifice Isaac, and then God, of course, provided the lamb. The message, I'm going to cry. The message that I came out of that one day, this is back when my husband was out of a job a few years back, and the Lord gave me 2 words. He said, be willing. And I truly believe that was the message through that story of Abraham. Abraham was willing to do whatever it took to say, I'm less and God, you're more. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the stance that we have to take each and every day. Be willing. Just be willing.
Amen. If you guys want to get a hold of Angie, I am going to have her contact info in the show notes of this podcast. So just scroll in there into the details and you can see that a little bit more. If you get lost and you can't find it, you can message me and I will help you get connected with her. She's amazing. She'll do some digital conversations with you over the phone on Zoom. I don't actually know what she does, but yeah. So if you want to set up a discovery call with me, if you want to talk about your health issues or anything that you're stuck in and you want to see if I can help you in any way, text the word battle to 33777. That's battle, BATTLE, to the number 33777. And there'll be a text sequence that you go through and you'll get set up for a discovery call right then and there. Just ask that you please share this with your friends, share this on your social media pages, just help us get the word out about these Enneagram types. And we thank you for listening. listening. We have got one more episode left. The 9s, the peacemakers, we're coming for you. I can't wait to learn a little bit more about that. So Angie, thanks for being here, and we will see you next week.